11 p.m. on the 21st of June 1948, the Empire Windrush arrived at the Tilbury Docks, Essex, carrying hundreds of passengers from British colonies in the Caribbean, including Jamaica, Guyana, Trinidad, Bermuda, and Belize. Many of those who landed in June 1948 were RAF servicemen who returned to help rebuild Britain after World War II. Other passengers later enrolled for public service. Some of the women were recruited for the National Health Service. Most had to leave their children behind, and as money was earned, their children were sent for one by one to be reunited with their parents.
When I first came to England, I lived in Acton. I was about 15 and a half. That was 1965. I always remembered because it was the year before the World Cup, which was 1966. My early life was really good until my mom and dad left to come to England. My mom and dad was renting places, cooking, and was sending money out for us to Jamaica to live.
We are twins. When we first arrived in England and the area was very disappointing to us. And it was in the winter, there was snow and there was fog everywhere. The houses was dilapidated.
Now, I was living life in Jamaica. I didn't really want to come to cold England, but my dad said, "Son, I need your help. Please come." So I came to England reluctantly.
Those who were opposed to the settlement of Caribbean people after World War II united behind the idea of wanting to keep Britain white. It wasn't uncommon to see this slogan spray-painted outside homes and businesses.
It was quite shocking because to experience racism, especially in school, was very hard to accept. There was an identity crisis amongst the youth. The wider society was rejecting them as British or English. As far as I experience or know, going back to their parents' country, I think they were welcome, but they was viewed as a foreigner.
Racial tension spiked again in the 70s and early 80s with anti-immigrant marches, the stop-and-search policy of the Metropolitan Police, and the New Cross fire, where 13 people were killed in what was believed to be a racially motivated attack. Many in the black community responded with activism until the tension exploded with uprisings.
The National Front was active and used to march. There was a fire at a party that was started deliberately.
We were the only two in the whole year group, in that particular form group. So about 30 children, and we were asked to stand up and speak on the Brixton riots. Can you imagine, you're sort of 15 and you're asked to give your opinion as to why the Brixton riots are happening?
Many black community organizations were set up in this period of turmoil.
I set up Black Insight in the 1970s and I applied to Brent Council Leisure Services for funds for us to have our own building and for us to have money for staff and running costs and to also provide activities. The name Black Insight because the services I wanted to provide for the community would come from a black perspective, meaning I could empathize with the community, the black community, knowing what the problems they're facing. And from a black perspective, I'm able to provide services like information, advice, representation at tribunals, local, we set up a dance group, we set up conferences and activities. And one of our major events was Window on Africa and the Caribbean. The speakers talked about Africa because black people have to realize that the ones who came from the Caribbean, that's not where they started from. They need to know more about Africa. That's why we named it Black African, Window on Black Africa and the Caribbean. There was volunteers needed outside the Five and O's Community Centre. Started doing voluntary work there, where I set up a single-parent family group. The typical problem at the time was housing and repairs and education, employment, racism. So we represented those that came to us, that we could talk to their bosses, represent them in schools.
I started at West Indian League, which was an all-black youth club in Granville, in Kilburn, Now, we started to run that club and we were very successful. But I realized that the caretaker, who, when white people wanted to come to the club, he was stopping them. And I think it was wrong. It shouldn't just be black. If you run in a center, it should be black and white if they really wanted to come. So it wasn't really sticking with me for me to a whole black club in a white society. A man, Dame Sparry, invited me to join Kingfisher, which was a mixed club. We had black, we had white, we had Indians. I took over Kingfisher when Dave Sparry died. And I joined them until I retired, basically.
It's testament to Carol Bent, again, who ran the whole place. Going to Avenues was like a rite of passage. Like I went at 12, but I wanted to go when I was 9, 8. It was directly across the road from my school, my primary school. I used to see all the older kids going there, and just not being allowed to go there until I was 12 just made me want to go there even more. Going to Avenues was like a rite of passage.
I always used to see the way that Carol Bent at the Avenues handled authority. So I was 12 for 3 years, and then it felt like weight lifted off my shoulders as soon as I was old enough to like roam the building.
Carol Bent, who runs the Avenues, had a lot of input. His mum, so my dad and his mum were part of this very grassroots organisation working towards the betterment of local African Caribbean people in the area at the time.
So I could put it down to individuals like Carol Bent, who used to run the service. His viewpoint on anything, any rudeness, any badness, any breaking of the rules, club was closed. Everybody gets punished for one person's misdemeanor.
Everything was free. They didn't have to pay for anything.
If they couldn't face it on their own, they needed support, we were there. Everything free of charge.
Trips and activities were arranged to enrich the lives of young people in the community.
So London Transport did these weekly or fortnightly. It felt like it was weekly, but on the buses, it was literally on the buses. We used to be on the Red Rover, the double-decker, going to the seaside. Families, it was for families that worked for London Transport, and I had some close friends. Their parents both worked for it. So, but it wasn't just, limited. It was open to the community.
And every summer holidays, she organised summer trips for the local children to go to the seaside to have a 2 or 3 weeks holiday at the seaside. I remember going to Blackpool with them.
One thing that I think really kind of brought a lot of people together which I really remember, is seaside trips. When I think of the trips, there wasn't actually a space. It was more a concept of an intergenerational activity that was facilitated.
Brent was twinned with a city in Germany called München. And each year, kids from Brent used to go to Germany. And the following year, German kids used to come and stay at parents' homes. And it was really, really, really good events.
Avenues gave me loads of my first experiences. Like, first time I ever went on a boat and went sailing was with Avenues. First time I ever went camping was with Avenues. The byproducts of that, I think it helped me become who I am and stay away from crime. So I'm really thankful for Avenues for that.
Going to a theme park for the first time, going outside of London, like on a motorway, going to the cinema for the first time, knowing it's just the outskirts of London, but thinking it was a whole different town, like Hemel Hempstead. We went like skiing and all of these things that, to this day, I wouldn't have been brought there from like my parents. So these were things that I was able to experience, not just by myself, but also with my peers, with my neighbours. It had the ability to allow other young people to imagine what that's like, and also have that vision of one day, like, doing more or going to different places outside of just our local area.
About 1980-82, we were Kingfisher Football Club in adjacent with Brent and the Jamaican government, we took a netball team, a swimming team, and a football team to Jamaica on a 5-week tour. And that was fantastic.
There used to be a guy who used to run the radio at Avenues, and his name was Luke. We used to call him Luscious Luke. And people used to ridicule him for his hairstyle, for the way he spoke. But listen, you see his dedication as a youth worker to keep the radio going, to be there. The radio used to run 24 hours for a whole month. The amount of people that forged music careers, learnt to MC, learnt to speak, be public speakers, just learnt to speak up and be a man, and learnt to hone their craft in that tiny little box of a radio room and a studio. It's testament to him.
Interestingly enough, my dad was involved in community, then stood as a candidate locally for the Social Democrats Party. So I think that is probably a catalyst for me thinking that's something that appealed to me. In some ways, I think a seed potentially was sown, and I found myself involved in spaces where I could potentially make a contribution.
Growing up in Avenues helped me to learn to respect my elders. It's almost immeasurable. I appreciate community centres more now because I work in it. I'm a programme manager at the Avenues Youth Project that I used to go to.
I started my own charity, the ESP Foundation, which looks at education, sports and policy, just 3 main areas that I've done quite a lot of work to and dedicated a lot of time.
Obtaining funding has continually been a challenge for Black-run organisations.
The problem that was known that we had with the Black Women's Group was trying to get the funding.
Black Inside fell into that category. We had to close as well because we couldn't afford to run the centre as well as pay staff and to put on the activities that we wanted to do.
I worked so hard that come the 80s, it tore on my health. In the 80s, it was a crescendo. Not just my health, but many other activists were collapsing, whether mentally or physically, because we had put in so much. I got into local government, started my job as a local government officer, but it was too late. My health was so badly affected.
When I found I've given my energy in a very kind of authentic way, it's taken, and then there comes a point where it's seemingly not necessarily it needed anymore. Some of us are really tired. I feel quite emotional saying that. We're exhausted. Those of us who care and we've done stuff and we put ourselves in certain positions where I found myself in this area, North Westminster, being accused of being a racist and going and sitting and having a legal meeting in the town hall to justify my position as to why I've talked about white privilege. How can that be? And this is within the last 10 years. When we say we're tired, we're tired.
There's no youth centres anymore. And so how do you pass it down? It's very difficult to pass down when there's no centre for them to go to.
Since 2015, since the government made loads of cuts to youth services, it decimated the whole landscape of youth work. Young people are so left to their own devices.
When I see the young kids, I call them young kids, believe it or not. They're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, some of them even 50s. But when I meet up with them, they all come and hug me and thank me for what I did in the community.
When I make reference to the Queen's Park Community Council, and I think that will leave a legacy insofar as it's a statutory council that's been set up. For it to be dismantled, it will have to be dismantled through law equally. So it's definitely something there. I think I'd like to comment more to do with not so much the legacy, but the knowledge of people's kind of input.
If you can't find an organisation that will help you, do it anyway.
Once we get our heads together and realise that we're better together than apart. Yeah, the best is yet to come, for sure.
Do I feel British? Yes, I do, but I'm Caribbean British. I don't classify myself as just British.
I've never felt British. Don't forget I'm Jamaican, you know. And if you see kids born in England, if you ask them, they tell you they're from Jamaica because their parents is from Jamaica.
British meant to me was diverse, because that's what I saw on a day-to-day basis. So I guess from a primary school, secondary school age, yeah, definitely felt like I belonged.